I love great conversations. Hi, my name is Angel Jones. Thank you for joining me on 12-minute convos where I help you create a brand of your own unique, real self. Listen in as I have conversations with amazing people from all over the world. Good night, Peter Fornatale. How are you going on this wonderful, beautiful night?
Oh, doing great. Great to hear the mellifluous sound of your voice, and happy to be able to join you here for a few minutes.
Hey, well, it is a great pleasure to have you on as well. I got to dig into your podcast. Wow, but please tell us, what part of the world are you in, Peter?
I live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm currently speaking to you from what I call the Brooklyn Bunker, my home office here in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I've got the baseball playoffs on in the background, doing a little laundry, getting ready for the rest of the week here.
Yeah. It does come so quickly, doesn't it? The rest of the week, the next day. But tell me, which of your talents is responsible for us meeting?
Gosh, that's a great question. One of the things in all the business I'm in, whether it's book publishing, where I got my start, or the horse racing industry where I work now, networking is a very important aspect of it. So as a LinkedIn member, we must have been 1 degree of separation one way or another. And I heard this idea of a podcast about podcasts, and it just sounded too cool not to respond and get a chance to see who was behind it and maybe pitch in and help out a little bit at the same time.
Yeah. The podcast world is surrounded by family, right? It's an amazing family. I appreciate that tremendously. Now tell us about your podcast, the Daily Racing Form, right? That's one of them, right? No, actually that is the podcast, but you're doing that twice, right?
That's it, exactly. It's called the DRF Players Podcast. It's of great interest if you like horse racing, the sport of horse racing. We broadcast twice a week. You can catch us live via Spreaker, or you can subscribe through all the normal podcast channels. And we talk about the issues of the day in racing. And for folks who like to have a bet every now and again, we try to give out some winners on there. One of my best friends is my co-host, a fellow named Jonathan Kinchin. And we have a lot of fun going back and forth, making fun of each other, and hopefully answering questions and educating and entertaining some of the Daily Racing Forum customers along the way. Folks interested would probably want to focus on the shows before racing's biggest events. If you're not a big-time racing fan, I recommend tuning in around the time of the Kentucky Derby in May, or actually for the upcoming Breeders' Cup in the beginning of November. Check us out, hear what we have to say, and then maybe go have a bet on a horse race, or just watch on TV with a little bit of armed with a little bit of knowledge about what's going on.
So where did the love for horses, where did that come in, and where did you connect it to doing a podcast?
Well, I remember very much my parents being racing fans. I can recall them going to Roosevelt Raceway on Long Island and coming back with the multicolored tickets that from when they make wagers. That was when I first became aware of horse racing. I really got into racing when I found out about the town of Saratoga Springs, where my wife and I have a second home. We're fortunate to get to visit on some weekends, and typically for the whole summer. The racing from New York City moves up to Saratoga for the summer, and it's really just a wonderful town and a great place to hang out. And it's the best racing in the country there. And falling in love with Saratoga made me fall in love with racing. And then when I started working for the Daily Racing Forum as a writer about 4 years ago now, a podcast was something that was always in the back of my mind. My father was a broadcaster in rock and roll radio. He was a disc jockey in New York, playing rock and roll from the late 60s until his untimely passing in 2012. And here I had this opportunity to meld two things I was really interested in, horse racing and broadcasting. My friend Matt Bernier and I pitched the idea of this show, and things took off from there.
Wow. What a story. So You're there, you're podcasting now. I'd like to know, why will you continue to repeat this skill?
Well, I think we've just had such a positive feedback, and where we've really found our footing, and we've been part of a community. Horse racing, people think of it as the purview of older folks, I think a lot of times retired folks. But the fact of the matter is, there is a real audience out there of younger people who've fallen in love with the game, whether it's for the intellectual challenge of trying to figure out who's going to win the race, or it has to do with the majesty of the horse itself. And these younger people have really rallied around us and given us great feedback. And I think we've become a little bit of a touchstone for some of the younger racing fans, and they just provide so much inspiration. I couldn't imagine not doing it at this point, just because of all the positive feedback we get. Just last weekend, I was visiting Lexington, Kentucky, the seat of the horse racing industry really in America, and it was so gratifying just to be walking around in the backyard, not the backyard there, but by the paddock there, and people will come up and say, "Hey, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work." And it's such a great compliment, because of course, as podcasters, they don't always see our faces. So the fact that people can, connect the voice with the face and give that positive feedback, it gives you a real charge and means something, I think.
Yeah. I love that. And it's so, since I've been speaking and listening to others on these podcasts, there are a few people that can hold their breath in a length of words, right? And you guys do it really amazingly, right? Like you could go 12, 15 words easily in one breath, and that I love.
Yeah, it's an art form, and you can sometimes end up out of breath and saying something strange every now and again. But I like to think that my father passed along to me the gift of gab to some way or another, and if I can sort of keep the family legacy alive by spitting out a lot of words, I could never be as good as him. I used to see him. He'd do cold reads at the radio station. In other words, they just give him a piece of paper with an ad, and the first time he was looking at the words, could read it through like a professional voiceover guy. Wow. I certainly can't do that, but I like to think I can help keep the conversation going, at least on the DRF Players Pod.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, if your podcast is running, and let's say someone is passing by and they hear you speaking and the horses are not there, I'm telling you, they're going to wonder, who are you speaking about? Like, where's that person? Because it's that good. It's that real. Well, Peter, please do tell me one other thing that you've done consistently over the last 3 years.
Related to the podcast specifically, or just in
it
life?
It could be life. Yeah, it could be life.
Well, one thing that I do very consistently is try to continue to work on my writing. Also along the lines of the horse racing business, I have a great friend who's a professional horse player who lives in Lexington, Kentucky. We have a new book coming out in the beginning of November. It's called Betting with an Edge, and it's basically a hybrid of a memoir and an instructional for this professional horse player who's been doing it for decades. I've worked on books in other areas as well. A terrific friend of mine is a guy named Chris Jericho, who's a rock star and pro wrestler, who a lot of people might be familiar with. I've had the pleasure of working with Chris now on 4 books that are basically his memoirs. What I really like in writing is the ability to find a creative person who just needs a little bit of help telling their story. And I love to collaborate on that level. And as disparate as the worlds of horse racing and professional wrestling are, I feel like, in a sense, my job on those 2 projects was very similar. And I'll also do writing along the lines of some stuff that's a little more in my voice as well. For example, I worked on a book. It's actually been 3 years now since it came out. It seems amazing that it's been that long. But I worked on a book called Brooklyn Spirits, all about cocktails and distilling in Brooklyn. Let me tell you, the research for that one was a real bear.
I can imagine. How does it make you feel?
Oh, I feel extremely satisfied and almost giddy when I have the opportunity to capture these stories and these stories of other people and put them on a page. What's so satisfying about books, the tangible result of that work. I've written many, many things for print, and they're great, and I love that they live online and someone can access them if they really want to access them. But there's something so satisfying, and I can't wait till it happens with Betting with an Edge, when you get that package in the mail and you take that book out of the wrapping and you hold it in your hand and you say, it's a book. The most satisfying professional experience I've ever had, and something I want to continue doing as much as my day job will allow.
Love it. Well, amazing audience, we are live with Peter Fornatale. Please do check him out. He has the podcast, the Daily Racing Form. They call it the DRF Players Podcast. Yeah, Peter, let's switch gears for a moment now. Let me invite you now into my time machine that is surrounded with beautiful, warm blue Caribbean water. Peter,
gorgeous. I love it.
What is your earliest childhood memory?
Wow. The first thing that popped into my head, I was in my crib and I was upset. I had a doll. It was not a doll, a stuffed animal that was a Labrador Retriever, I believe. It was a black dog with floppy ears, and I was very upset because one of the ears of the dog had fallen off. And I can remember my father, same name as me, P. Fornatale, whom I was speaking of earlier, coming in and taking a safety pin and repinning the ear on the dog, and then having the feeling that all was right with the world. That's the first thing I can remember.
So you're in the crib, right? How old do you think you were?
I couldn't have been more than, 2 or 3? Had to be. I don't think you're supposed to be able to remember things from that early, but I swear I do. And the memory comes full circle as I'm sitting here in my office, and my actual real live Labrador Retriever, who frequently makes herself known on the podcast by barking, comes into the room.
So why do you think this memory is so clear, Peter?
It's a great question. I think that idea of someone, a loving gesture that took away, I mean, at the time, hey, I was 2 or 3. It sounds melodramatic, but to take away pain, it's pain at that point. And who knows, maybe that was one of the first times I can remember love being expressed in my direction. Maybe that's why it's stuck with me all these years.
Well, can I offer an interpretation to the thought picture you created in my mind?
Please.
I just love the idea of how important it is to listen. And the ears being stuck on again just represents that for me, the importance to listen.
I love it. And what a perfect message from one voice in the night to another.
Yeah. If we fast forward to when you were 12, what was your favorite song?
Let's see. 12 would have been 1984. I definitely listened to some top 40 around that time, but I can still remember earlier than that dancing around to the music of Bruce Springsteen. So I'm going to go with something, maybe the title cut to Born to Run. I was a pretty hip 12-year-old.
There we go, Born to Run. I love it. Well, Peter, we've arrived at our destination, but before we get off of this time machine, there's a small declaration form. So it's yes or no, possibly a bit more. Peter, we're going to move pretty quickly here. Peter, have you chosen someone to pass on your skills to?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Are you married?
I am.
Do you have children?
I do. One daughter.
Do you believe in God?
Sort of.
Do you have an inner circle of friends?
Yes.
Do you watch TV for more than 3 hours a day?
That's probably a pretty good over-under. Sports stuff mostly.
What about screen time, the phone and the computer? Is it more than 8 or less than 8 hours a day?
Oh, once again, probably a pretty good over-under. I guess if you count TV, if you count TV along with the other screens, it's probably, unfortunately, slightly over.
Well, Peter, I'll tell you something. After 1,001 conversations in 3 months, I came up with something. It's called Yours, and it's a workbook. It stands for Your Own Unique Real Self. Connected to that is your own unique real statement as you journey deeper into the book. Your mission. If you had to share with us, Peter, your own unique real statement, a statement that represents who you are, what would you say that is?
keep on rocking.
Love it. Hey, it connected, right? Even from Bruce Springsteen days, right? Keep on rocking. Hey, Peter, this has been a great pleasure. Before you leave, is there anything else you'd like to share with our amazing audience?
Just thank you for supporting the creativity of broadcasting and podcasts. I think with the state of where radio is these days, podcasts are where it's at, and the more you can do to keep that flame burning and enjoy the intimacy of audio. It's a special medium, and I'm glad to see it alive and well in the 21st century, thanks to people like yourself.
Hey, thank you, my friend. I appreciate that tremendously. Peter Fornatale, hey, thank you for being on what is inspired by 12-Minute Convos with Angel Jones.
Cheers, Angel. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on 12-Minute Convos with Angel Jones. Stay tuned for more from our advertisers.
Diabetes is a mountain pandemic. It's a disease that's not acute but chronic. Similar to this rhyming method, I have simplified the definition, the signs and symptoms, and the complications of diabetes for both adults and children in my books, Poems for Patients, A Focus on Diabetes, and The ABCs of Diabetes for Children. These books are available on Amazon.com, and for more information, you can visit my website, poemsbyaj.com. That's poemsbyaj.com.